A good day to the matriculants. We are going to be looking at the preparation for our paper 2, which is English Home Language. And therefore, we're going to be putting all the components together this afternoon to try and refresh on what we must be knowing in preparation for the exam. One of the demanding qualities of this paper is that we have poems that we did individually and at a slower pace through the course of the year. But we have to now put them together and know all of them in preparation for the exam. Please remember, do not target which poem will come. Any poem is able to come into the exam, and as such you must know all your poems by now. All the same, we are going to touch on qualities that we need to remember and traits and characteristics of the poems and what we touch on when it comes to those poems, our novels and our play. So as such, it means that we have to focus on looking at the poems, a breakdown of what we need to know. I will start with Sonnet 130, which is a poem that we brought from grade 11, if you remember. And as such, one of the confusing elements that we struggled with learners is the issue of the satire. So I'm going to touch on the issue of the satire because it's always been confused. One of the things when we need to know is that what is satiric about the poem and where is the mockery? Because we will get answers that the Shakespeare mocks the mistress. We must understand that the mockery is based on his fellow typical poet writers, and as such, the mockery is not directed at the mistress. So that's something that we worry about, and therefore we need you to internalize and understand. What are we focusing on when it comes to Sonnet 130? I'm going to touch on the structure. The structure is very important. It is a sonnet. So if it's a sonnet, we must be able to understand that when talking about sonnets, we are talking about a specific structure in mind. We have a Shakespearean sonnet that is 14 lines. Divided into two parts. We have an octave, which is line 1 to 12, and we have a rhyming couplet, which is line 13 to 14. Our octave is divided into 3 quatrains. So that's something that we must put together so that you can be able to align your content with the structure. Structure and content have a relationship. In line 1 to 12, whereby we call it the octave, he deals with different qualities of the mistress that he divides into different quatrains. For example, quatrain number 1 is line 1 to 4, whereby he deals with the mistress's eyes, the lips, the breasts, and the hair. So this is what we mean when we're talking about quatrains. Quatrains deals with specific characteristics of the mistress's features. But you move on and say in line 5 to 8, he deals with the cheeks, which is the cheeks of the mistress, the breath of the mistress, and as such, that's when you now are aligning the features. In line 10 to 12 deals with this. So you must be able to align your content and say the structure deals with this part, and therefore it means that this is what is happening. Line 13 to 14 is introduced by the volta and yet. So when you say introduced by the volta and yet, we must be able to align to say, and yet brings a change in the content. If it brings a change in the content, we must be able to align ourselves to say, the mistress's physical features are cancelled out by the rhyming couplets because he loves the mistress for who she is, and therefore it has nothing to do with the physical features. He makes beauty internal and it's not external. So what does it do? Despite the mistress's unappealing physical features, he loves the mistress for who she is. So this is what we focus on when coming into the structure of the poem, and therefore we must be able to understand what it means. Now, when we're coming to the sonnet, the structure, the mood, the tone, the imagery must be internalized, because we must be able to know negative similes are used. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun is a what we call a negative comparison. So when we're coming in and talking about identify the figure of speech, you must be able to know and understand that that is what we call a negative simile in line 1, and therefore compares the mistress's eyes to the sun. And therefore, effectively, what does it do? His mistress's eyes are dull. They are not as bright and beautiful as the sun. That's the meaning of the metaphor. So this is what you should be able to internalize, to say, identify the figures of speech. When we're talking about the tone, we should be talking about the mocking tone, the teasing, playful, heart in cheek. We should be talking about a blunt. So that's what we mean now when talking about the tone. When we're talking about satire again, when we say satirizes the use of extreme praise, when we say her breath reeks, he's not satirizing the mistress's breath, but he's satirizing the conventional use of extreme praise by the typical poet writers. So now this is what we mean when we're talking about be very specific when answering when it comes to a sonnet 130, and know exactly the function of line 1 to 12, the content of line 1 to 12, the tone of line 1 to 12, the figures of speech of line 1 to 12, and then the change that is brought by line 13 and 14, the honesty that is in line 13 and 14, the true love, the adoration, and as such, that's when you are now putting the sonnet together. As such, when we're talking about this part, Shakespeare uses negative comparisons to describe the uniqueness and beauty of his loved one. He does not need to exaggerate her looks. She is perfect to him, although he does seem critical and rude. In the first 12 lines, as we say, blunt, the reader realizes that he is, in fact, sincere in his love for his mistress. And that's where now we're saying in the rhyming couplet, what does he do? He declares by heaven, he thinks his love is rare and valuable. He does not need, the key word is unrealistic comparisons, to declare his genuine love. Those are our key words today. In being so brutally honest, he has ironically given her a heightened beauty simply because he does not dote on her outward appearance. The love is based on the internal beauty and not on the external beauty. So this is what we are coming into when talking about the cliches used by the typical love poets, that he cancels out and mocks or satirizes. So that's why we had to be very specific of what you focus on when it comes to these sonnets, Shakespearean sonnet 130. So now we are looking at the impact of the external versus the internal, and therefore you must be able to separate exactly. And it is separated because of the content, remember, which is separated by the structure of the poem itself. It is a link, a beautiful link that you must create together. Structure is dividing the mood, the tone, the content, and you must be able to give that. All right, let's go to our next poem. Our next poem that we're going to be talking about is The Child Who Was Shot Dead by Soldiers at Nyanga, Ingrid Jonka. This poem is based on the protests, marches that happened against the passbook, which was being used during the apartheid system. So when we're coming to this poem, we are going to talk about the issue of the deaths and the brutality that were brought by the police force of the apartheid regime. The title of the poem is very narrative because it's a statement. It's a sentence, a full sentence. The child was shot dead by soldiers at Nyanga. The identity of the child is withheld for reasons that the child now becomes a symbol in the poem. So it does not focus on one child, but it now focuses on all the children that died and lost their lives during the uprisings that happened. The title says the child was shot dead. The shock and the brutality is I mentioned in the title, which gives us an image of a brutal death of a child. And the title specifically declares that the child is dead. But we have a contrast when we come to the first line, because the first line says the child is not dead. We've seen this question before. So you must be able to give the contrast of saying the child physically is dead, but the child spiritually is still alive in the hearts of the people who are remaining and is now used as a symbol. So when we come to this poem, we must be able to understand that the child now is used as a, a symbol to now give them the confidence to fight for their freedom and to resist and create and start a revolution. So when we're coming into this poem, we are talking about the issue of resistance and revolution. A revolution that must end the pain caused by the apartheid regime. Now, when we're coming to the title here, it says symbol of all the innocent children who were killed by soldiers under apartheid in SA because he only wanted to play in the sun. Shot dead by soldiers emphasizes the extreme brutality of the soldiers. The key word is extreme. The title evokes a sympathy for the child. He is vulnerable. He is helpless against the effects of apartheid. So when we're coming into this poem, we are taking it and deriving from the title to tell us the scenario of the child's death and what the child's death now becomes in the hearts of the remaining Black people in South Africa during the apartheid system. We are going to talk a little bit about the structure of the poem because of all poems, we must know every poem has a different structure. The structure of the poem is a free verse poem. We know that by now. And one of the things we must understand is that it is, what do we call it? Having different or varying lengths when it comes to sentence, varying lengths when it comes to the stanzas as well. That's why we call it a free verse poem. It is dominated by the anaphora, repetition of the phrase, the child, the child. So that's something that is repeated continuously in the poem, and the anaphora becomes the core of the poem itself. We also have a coda at the end of the poem, which is a one-line stanza without a pass. And we're saying it's an epilogue, a conclusion to the poem. And as a result, it's the irony in the poem. We will talk about that one at the end of this poem. Right, when we're coming to the poem itself, one of the things we're going to mention is the idea that young people are now showing anger towards the adults, which is their mothers and fathers, for not protecting them and fighting for them. So that's why we're talking about the anger. Raises his fist against his mother, raises his fist against his father. And as such, we're talking about a mood and a tone of anger is created by the young children who feel they were not protected by their fathers and mothers. As a result, those who were oppressed. So now in the locations of the heart under siege, we know it's in the townships. They were oppressed, they were overcrowded, and that's where the arrest always happened. And as a result, we now remember the issue when we talked about the historical background of where we understand that there was nowhere to run, and therefore they will be raided and easily arrested. And mothers would just close the windows and close the curtains and stay in the house. And such, when we're coming in, we are talking about the armed pride in the child raises his fist against his father in the march of the generations. When we say march of the generations, we get to understand that those who have marched against the past laws in the past are many. So it has happened consecutively, whereby they have been marching and trying to protest against the passbook, and as such it has continued. And now finally, when we're coming about, when we say the streets of his armed pride, the young ones are taking the guns and going into the street, and therefore knowing very well that it is a risky move, but they will still do it in pride for them to try and bring a change about for themselves. So as a result, they are willing to sacrifice their lives, and they are doing it with pride. Holding the gun so young as they are, and I believe we remember when we gave the discussions, we talked about the Soweto uprising, whereby they were so young, 16 of years of age, 15, 14, and that's what we're bringing into the idea. So now when we're coming in, we're talking about we are referring to the child is not dead, neither at Langa nor at Nyanga, Orlando, Shapperfield, Philippi, where he lies with a bullet in his head. This is where we are talking about the places where the large anti-pass law demonstrations happened. So it became provincial. It did not remain at Nyanga, but it continued to the other provinces, and the child became an inspiration for the other provinces to arise and protest as well. So now these are the other places that are mentioned there, where he lies with a bullet in his head. The police or the army reacted with violence, but the protesters were unarmed. The demonstrators were killed and shot at the spot. The child is now given youth symbolism in the following stanza, whereby he is the shadow of the soldiers. He is present at all meetings and legislations. When we say he's the shadow of the soldiers, he follows the soldiers as they enforce their oppressive laws. But not only does he does that, he is now at all the meetings that will bring a change. When it comes to legislations and new rules and new laws put into place, the child is now going to touch the hearts of the mothers who would not take part in protecting the little ones, but now they will be part of the demonstrations as well. So now we are looking at also the line that shows the innocence of the child and the youngness of the child. He just wanted to play in the sun at Nyanga. So we now realize the symbol of freedom is a child who was still very young and still wanted to play and be free innocently. Now he's in the hearts and homes of those who are oppressed. He's in the soldier camps. He's in the courts and meetings and offices. But not only does he stop there, he treks through all of Africa. Beautiful diction in this poem. Armed pride treks through Africa. Heart under siege, raises his fist, march of generations, scream the smell, freedom and hither, giant. We have beautiful diction in this poem, and as such, these are words that you must know have made an impact. When we say treks through Africa, he is no longer known in South Africa and a symbol in South Africa, but is now a symbol and motivating the other African countries to actually also rise up and fight for their justice and their freedom. He doesn't stop there. He becomes a giant and travels through the whole world. Now the irony is in the quarter that says without a pass. When you say without a pass, I believe we're talking about the issue that he is no longer restricted by the oppressive pass law. For him to travel through the world, he did it without even a passport. Therefore, that now gives it cancels out the importance of the passbook. There was no need for him to have a passbook because he has done it. He has traveled without the passbook. And the irony is that he died while they were protesting against the passbook. So when we're coming into this poem, we are now looking at the desire and the yearning amongst the South African hearts, or the hearts of the young South Africans, to be free. So now we are coming in and say the child shows the brutal journey that blacks took to finally become free. I'm going to come to the child can slip into all meetings here and legislations. He peeps through the windows and into the hearts of mothers to infuse the spirit of anger. The key word is to infuse the spirit of anger inside the mothers who were silent. The child wants nothing bigger than their demands. He just wants to play in the sun of Nyanga, nothing else. But after his death, the whole country has become his playground. He has transformed into a man. Premature growth is what is implied there, and treks through Africa. This metaphorical child of anger has grown to the size of a giant. As we say, the coda at the end refers to the pass laws, which are a form of internal passport system designed to segregate the population, manage urbanization, and allocate migrant labor. So as a result, when we're coming into this poem, we are talking about, let's talk about figures of speech for a minute, because I will want to touch on figures of speech as well. One of the things we should come to when it comes to the figure of speech is, I believe it's Thundereduc is in line 10. I believe it's here as well, whereby we're talking about the term armed pride is an abstract idea that depicts the concrete term of proud soldiers. I believe we're talking about repetition of the term the child. I believe we are talking about anaphora, which is the repetition of the phrase. So now we must be able about the metaphor, which is the child is not dead, which is now coming in the contradiction that we talked about. So as such, when we come to this poem, we have allusion in the first line as well. The child is not dead, which means the poet now refutes the death of the child, because he's still alive in the hearts of the South Africans in the fight for justice and freedom. So now when we're coming into this poem, let's make sure that we understand the structure of the poem, as we said, the subject of the poem, the imagery of the poem. We have visual imagery, image of a child who raises his fist to show resistance. We have the image, auditory image, screams Africa, screams the smell, which is a demand for freedom and revenge. We have organic imagery, whereby we're talking about the experience of the pain, and I believe lies with the bullet in his head, whereby we are evoked to feel anger and sympathy for the child. So mood of the poem must be brought in so that you are able to talk about the issue of it creates a somber mood, a tragic mood, and I believe we're also going to talk about the tone of the poem, determination, resistance. So these are the things that you must bring in when coming into the poem, and as such, hopefully things will come into play. What is the message of the poem? I believe the message is to display and emphasize the harsh realities and the brutalities of the apartheid era. So I believe growing sense of freedom that cannot be contained, and those that is what we call the message of the poem. I believe when we're also talking about tone in the last stanza, it's an ironic tone, whereby we talked about the coda without a pass. Child does not require any pass, but what does he do? He is spread throughout the world without the need of a passbook. So that's what we are coming into when we're talking about the child who was shot dead. There's an angry mood, protesting mood. There is a bold tone, determined tone, a tone of resistance, a tone of revolution. So those are the things that we are coming into. It's a very long poem. That's why we get to go detailed. All right, let's go to the next poem, At a Funeral by Dennis Brutus. At a Funeral by Dennis Brutus is also based on an apartheid scenario whereby it is the senseless deaths of the young people in South Africa. So as such, we are talking about the poem based on a real life experience or scenario of the death of a young a female, Valencia Majombozi, who unfortunately died after qualifying as a doctor. And now when we're coming to At a Funeral by Dennis Brutus, we are also still on the injustices that were faced by the Black people during the apartheid era. Their struggles, their premature deaths, their lives cut short, their dreams cut short. And as a result, what did they do? They lost out on their futures. So when we're coming to this poem, we are going to touch on the symbolism again, because this is a poem that also carries the symbolism as well. So now when we're coming in, Valencia's death is also used as a symbol for resistance and a revolution ahead. This is a poem that is also loaded with a lot of diction. Pageantry. I don't know how many questions we have done on pageantry, many questions we have done on, I believe, stippled graves. We must be bringing everything together. All those activities that we were doing in class must pay off, because we are definitely going to be getting the same questions. And therefore, it means that panel P, this is beautiful diction. Pageantry is an elaborate display or ceremony. Pageantry is now has no purpose, has no meaning, which is what the death has been made to be. And now when we're talking of panoply, it is an impressive display or collection. Learners have been confused by the two before. That's why I go to them first. I'll repeat. Pageantry is an elaborate display or ceremony that has no meaning. Panoply is an impressive display or collection that is done without any meaning as well. So as such, these are the things that we are looking at when coming to this poem. Stubbled, small, rough, untaken care of, and as such, in relevance to the poem, we will be discussing that as well. When we say at a funeral, I believe one of the things we are going to talk about is the issue of the reference to a funeral. It has made it impersonal because it's talking about any funeral. So as such, it's not at Valencia Majombozi's funeral, but at a funeral. So that's something that we also have been talking about for a while, to say that's where now it doesn't go personally to Valencia's funeral, but makes it impersonal. Now, when we're coming to colors, we are talking about the colors of the liberation movement, which is the ANC. But not only that, I believe we're also talking about the colors of the graduation gowns that were worn when people were graduating at universities. So as such, we are also talking about the issue of a solemn occasion at sunset, end of a death of a person, and end of a life, and such. This is made an elaborate display or ceremony. But now when it comes in, it says that we have expectant of eternity. The graves are personified, seem as if they're an expectant mother, a pregnant mother waiting for a child, but however, it is for the dead. This is a poem that is the dead live forever. That is what is given there. Stapled graves, unkept even in death. There was not much respect shown by the government to the final resting places of the oppressed. That's why they call them stapled graves, because they were unkept and untidy. And now comes in bright white nuns, white veils, that nurses cash their bounty. This is a symbolism of purity. The whiteness symbolizes purity. And now we're talking about frothing the bright white nuns, white veils, that nurses catch their bounty of red wine cloths, frothing the buckled, daging slopes. We are given the number of nurses that were there. They came out in numbers for the funeral, and as a result, that's beautiful diction there also, which highlights the number of nurses that attended. There were many. And now when we're talking about nurses cash their bounty, they are willing or giving everything they have to save the lives of those hurt in the fights for liberation. And I believe when we're talking about innocent victims of the brutality of the apartheid system, and I believe the colors lining the nurses' clocks is the red wine clocks. And as such, when we coming in, we now understand the issue of the importance of the innocent victims losing their lives prematurely. Salute with an apostrophe. That's a gesture of respect that is done. Then ponder all this hollow panoply. Ponder is to think deeply. And now when they say think deeply about this hollow panoply, the meaningless ceremony, think deeply about the meaningless ceremony with the flags and the speeches. It will change nothing. That's what that line implies. It's a waste being thrown into the ground, along with the hopes that they had for her. Divorce our hopes. So one who's give the mud divorce with our hopes. So they're seeing this as a waste. And as such, it means that their lives and their dreams and their hopes are cut short. So now when it says, "Oh, all you frustrate ones," when we begin with the interjection "or," I believe we are very specific to say this is a shift in perspective from the girl to all the youth now. So it's no longer on just one, it's all the youth in this instance. Their potential is tombed in debt, is buried because of their debts. Those who have potential, who have dreams, who have goals, have not been able to be fulfilled because of the oppressive laws which denied them the opportunities. Stanza 2 shifts focus to the meaningless death of the youths in general, aborted not by death but carrion books of death. The ending of a life before it begins is what aborted is implying. Carrion is rotten flesh. And I believe reference to the passbook that was used, people were categorized by what race they were born, if we remember. It is seen now as a decaying system that stopped people's lives before they even began or before they even began. Arise. And as such, that's where I believe death is personified there when we say the use of the capital letter D, death is made important. Arise is a call to arms, revolution. The brassy shout, very loud shout of freedom stirs our earth. The rallying call must be heard by all. And I believe it says, not death, but death's head tyrannus guides our ground. We have so many question papers that has this line and has been given what is this one? A priority. I believe we're talking about the reference to the Germans. They were responsible for all the atrocities in the World War II, if we remember, concentration camps. So he likens the forces of the government, of the apartheid government, to the Germans. Their badge was like the pirate's skull and cross horns, because they will cut off the heads of the Jews and then they will peg them up on sticks. And as such, I believe sky is our ground. Harvest, the scythe is used to harvest crops, but they were harvesting humans, human skulls. And as such, I believe when we're coming in now, we're also talking about the issue of carries a scythe to harvest the souls of the dead. The Grim Reaper, I believe, is what we called him when we were learning. Plots our narrow cells of pain, defeat, and death. I believe there's been a question so many times, ambiguity in this line. Planning that is done, the plans that are associated, the evil plans that are associated to end the lives of the people. And also at the same time, it means there's burial grounds that people were placed in. And I believe this is what the ambiguity in the word plots means. And I believe when we look at this word, when it says, many people were tortured in prisons. So as a result, I believe when you say defeat and death there, lack of something, lack of protective legislations for those who were part of the struggle must be brought in. But when we come to the last line, better that we should die than we should lie down. Now, the poet ends on a positive note because it's a declaration and a commitment that they, instead of accepting oppression, they must fight against it to bring down the oppressors. So now we are looking at the shifts in tones as well. Stanza 1 starts off with a very calm tone, very reverent, I believe, but it changes in stanza 2 to very angry and very contemptuous. The mood in stanza 1 is very melancholic because of the tragedy that has happened, but in stanza 2, it is very vengeful. So now when we come to the poem, the main cause, I believe I'm also going to talk about the other tones here. The mood of the poem is melancholic and somber, evoking feelings of sorrow, frustration, and anger. The poem also stirs a sense of hope and resilience as the speaker's call to action inspires a determination to challenge and resist the oppressive forces that cause such suffering. The tone of the poem is somber and reflective as the speaker mourns the tragic loss of Valencia and contemplates the senselessness of a death. The tone also carries a sense of defiance and determination, particularly when the speaker encourages the oppressed to rise up and fight against the injustices they face. So now when we're coming into this poem, we are now realizing that we are focusing on atrocities that were committed against the Black person in South Africa during the apartheid system. The passbook was a symbol of cruel apartheid laws. And as such, the cruelty that was rendered towards the Black led to their deaths as well. So now when we come in, the Nazis, I've seen that question so many times. I think we've seen it so many times coming in different ways as well. And yet we are still supposed to make sure whatever way we explain, we must be able to give out the brutality, the horrors that were used during that time. So now when we're coming in, we have, as I said, we have beautiful diction. I believe it's been highlighted here. Sunsets, pageantry, starboard graves. We've talked about them already. Expectant, eternity, frothing, buggle, dredging, salute, ponder. We've explained all of those. And as such, we prepare. That's what we do best. We get ready for the exam. We go to our next poem, number 4, poem of return. I think I enjoyed teaching this poem mostly because I believe it is a poem that shows that heroism is not about coming back into the country saying I'm a freedom fighter, but heroism is acknowledging that you were not there to suffer with the others, and therefore the flowers are not necessary. This is a poem of return by Geoffrey Rocha, and as such, when we're coming to this poem, very short but has a powerful meaning, and as such, we are going to try and do justice to it as well, so that we are ready to try and prepare for the exam. Now, when coming to this poem, I believe one of the things we must be very clear about is that we must understand that this is a poem from Angola. It is not a South African poem, if you remember. It's an Angolan scenario. And now when we're coming in, we are talking about the political unrest that happened in rural Angola. Guerrilla warfares were what were taking place. And as such, I believe when we're talking about being in exile is what he experienced when he left Angola. So now when we're coming to this poem, he was exiled from his land of birth and therefore he had to go overseas. When we say, when I returned from the land of exile in silence, I believe we're talking about the foreign place where they felt isolated, restricted, and as such, barrier in language, separation from family, no communication with families back home or friends, and as such, that's what we mean. Let's look at what is written here. The title of the poem, it says the speaker is returning to his country. At this stage, he does not know whether it is a voluntary or forceful return. That is, what is this one? Why in line number 1, we have the word when. There is no specification, but what we do know is that there will be a return that will happen. So he says, when that time finally comes, do not bring me flowers, he says. He does not want acknowledgement of being a hero, whereby the celebration is when they're at the airport, their country, which is of birth, the family, the friends will wait for them with a bunch of flowers in hand and a warm welcome of a hero's return to his country. Alienation is brought in the opening lines of the poem. Estrangement is brought in when he is away from home. So as a result, this is a theme in the poem. Exile is a theme in the poem. Being alienated and isolated is a theme in the poem. Nostalgia is a theme in the poem. So now when we anticipation is a theme in the poem. Patriotism, sacrifice are themes in the poem. So this is a poem that is an example of a resistance poem because it talks of alienation. So when we're coming into this poem, we are saying, it does have 14 lines, but it is not a sonnet. Because we have enjambment present, because one line runs onto the next to finish the thought. There is no punctuation in the poem at the end of the lines, some of the lines. So as a result, it's divided into 3 stanzas, unequal lengths as well. So as such, it draws us to the conclusion that it has 14 lines, but it is not a sonnet. So please don't confuse it and say because it has 14 lines automatically. No, it is not a sonnet because it is shrouded by the qualities that we have just mentioned. Now, when we're coming in, we are talking about the issue of great significance that happened in Angola. When he says, bring me rather all the Jews, tears of dawn which witness dramas, that is personification. I believe when we're talking of personification, we're very clear. The fact that he wants to know the terrible things that people saw that caused them pain or that people experienced. The anger, the heartache, the tears as they stayed and suffered, the injustices that happened. So now when we're coming in, nature is the one that witnessed the dramas, the people that were buried in the early hours of the mornings. So that's the one that we're talking about. When he says he does not want a hero's welcome, he does not want a traditional tribute given to him. But what does he demand instead? He demands to be brought a lot of things. Immense hunger for love. I believe he demands that he would rather know how the people of his land were deprived of physical connections because of the fighting. The fights had devastating effects on human relations. Couples were separated, wives were left husbandless and alone, and husbands were left wifeless. So as a result, because they were joining the freedom fighters. We have a bloodshed, tears, and bring me the long night of sleeplessness with mothers mourning their arms bereft of sons. Mothers were unable to sleep because of the mourning for their sons who had left and may or may not be dead. He needs to know what happened at home when he was in exile. He demands to be told the experience of the losses of the mothers that they experienced as the sons died or disappeared fighting for the liberation. When I return from the land of exile in silence, no, do not bring me flowers. These are a refrain. They emphasize the need not to be given flowers, as he says. So when we're coming in, we are saying that we need to understand that his demands are based on his heartache and regret of not being there to join in the fight. Bring me only. He says above everything else, bring me the dreams of those who died in the war of liberation, the last wish of the heroes fallen at daybreak, with a wingless stone in hand. So as a result, when we're talking about the wingless stone in hand, we must be clear. We must understand that when we say the paradox, that's the paradox, a wingless stone in hand. We are talking about the issue that they were still eager to fight. The Angolan men and women were still eager to fight for their country, but they did not get to do so up to the end. They died before using their weapons against oppressors. So, as such, when we're coming into this poem, Fallen Heroes, he's talking about those whose lives ended prematurely with a wingless stone in hand that they couldn't throw, that they had not thrown yet. So now when we're coming in, we are talking about those who died fighting died angry. That's the last line. A thread of anger snaking from their eyes. They died angry against their oppressors, even though they did not fight. They still carry the anger in their hearts and it is seen in their eyes. So now, when we're coming to this poem, we are talking about the sentiments of loss, lost opportunities, lost experiences. So when we're coming in, what should be celebrated is sadness, mourning, anger at what has not happened. So now when we're coming in, we are talking about the poem that is clearly expressing his desire and his cries for experiencing what he could not experience due to his absence. Now, when we're coming to the tone, we have a very earnest tone in the poem. We have a very nostalgic tone in the poem. We have a humble tone in the poem. He does not want a heroic welcome. He just needs the experience and to feel what the others felt. When we're talking about the mood, we have a very pensive mood in the poem, a reflective mood, and dealing with serious issues. That's why I will call it pensive. Now, when we're coming to the poem as well, the intention of the poem is to highlight the fact that the true heroes in war of liberation are not those who left the country, but are those who remained in their land of birth and not those ones who left. So hence, there is no need for heroic welcome. So now when we're coming to this poem and we are talking about people who were not in exile, suffered a great deal. Police brutality, tortures, premature deaths. Those are the dramas. The personifications that are showing the tears of dawn, physical connections, long nights of sleeplessness, the mourning, the premature deaths of the heroes. And as such, that's what we are focusing on and must understand. When they say identify and explain the figures of speech, you must be able to give it its name. For example, identify and explain the figure of speech in line 4, let's say line 4, whereby we talked about the issue of tears of dawns which witness dramas. You must be able to specify that we are talking about personification. So as such, the nature is given human qualities of having eyes to witness the atrocities and the burials that happened due to the violence. So this is what we bring out when trying to be specific about the poem. So as such, when we come into a poem of return, figures of speech are not too much, but they are there. So which means they are easy to grasp. The tone, the mood is dominating in this poem, and as such, we must be able to internalize those things. Okay, we go to our next poem, which is poem number 5. Talk to the peach tree. A lot of learners kept saying, I do not understand this poem. I do not understand this poem, so let's try and break it down today. Talk to the Peach Tree is back in the South African context, and if we're back in the South African context, we are dealing with Sipho Sepamla. Now, when coming to Talking to the Peach Tree, this is a poem that is filled with absurdities. I believe we have conversations that happen with the birds, the shadows. So as such, learners kept saying, I don't understand this poem. No, 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 no. I don't understand this poem. So as a result, we must break it down today. Right, when we're coming to Sipho Sepamla, the poem is filled with the need for communication, the need for peaceful conversations to achieve peaceful solutions. This is also based on the cruelties of the apartheid system, but now he differs with the other poems that we have done, which is the ones we talked about earlier on, the Machombozi, the child was shot dead, because he does not, Sepamla does not call for a revolution and resistance and armed prides. No, he calls for peaceful fights through negotiation and talks. So this is where he differs with the others, because he does bring in the issue of that this poem is based on what we experience, but he does not go to the pain. He actually goes to the issue of that there is a need to sit down and talk about the solutions peacefully with the enemy, who's the white person, and therefore open channels of communication is the overall theme of this poem. Oppressed people must exhaust all peaceful forms of communication for them to address apartheid. Freedom of expression was restricted during that time. Hence, talking to the peach tree first was what was needed. They were supposed to sit down amongst themselves to try and pave a way forward of how to solve the problems. And then finally, they would go and talk to the government. So as such, let's go to the poem and see what we are dealing with in this poem. It is a 21-line poem. It has no rhyme scheme, which means we categorize it as a free verse. It is a protest poem as well against the apartheid government in South Africa. And I believe we have the same pattern in the first 3 stanzas and the last 3 stanzas. What do we mean? Arrangement of stanzas, arrangement and pattern when it comes to diction is what we're focusing on. So as such, let's go and see what comes into the poem. Talk to the peach tree. The peach tree has significance in this poem. It was a place of gathering for people in the townships where much discussions, sharing of information, opinions happened. So as a result, Talk to the Peach Tree is actually a personification, as we are coming into this poem that is filled with personification. It says, he draws attention to the fact that all the poems, all the stanzas, my apologies, are touching on talking. That is necessary and valuable. Ask how it is in other countries when you talk to the swallows visiting us in summer. Personification dominates this poem. Speaking to objects that cannot answer back is what we're talking about. When he says, let's talk to the swallows visiting us in summer, ask how it is in other countries. We are supposed to understand how people live in the other countries, understand how they are dealing with oppression in their countries. Ask how the day has been so far. Reflect on the state of affairs in the community or the country. So it's not literally the swallows. It is not literally the afternoon shadow. No. When you say swallows, this is just personification of say, let us ask how it is in other countries so that we can make a comparison and understand how they are dealing with things. But when we say talking to the afternoon shadow, it means that the day has passed. So how has the day been so far? What has happened or what has changed? State of affairs, how are they in the community? How are they in the country? So it's a reflection that people must do at the end of the day. Let's raise our pets to our level. Ask them what they don't know of us. The young pets are not the dogs and the cats, but this is young people who might have radical ideas of how to deal with the injustices. So they should be included in the talks and the conversations that we do so that they should be listened to as well and they can learn for us. So when we're talking about swallows, this is not swallows. These are people who visit South Africa. So which means they can tell us how it is in their countries. When we're talking about the afternoon shadows, we're talking about people who are aware of what has happened in the workplaces, people who are aware of what has changed, laws that have changed, and therefore that's what we are talking about. And now when we're talking about ask them what they don't know of us. Young people must be explained the backgrounds of the adults, the perspective of the adults, the history that may not be known or understood by them because of their immaturity and age. So now when we're coming in, we're saying words have lost meaning like all notations, they've been misused. Censorship, propaganda was the order of the day during the apartheid systems. They would censor things that they felt would be sensitive and cause riot in people. Propaganda was the preconceived statements that will be given to people so that they can be brainwashed and aligned to a certain behavior and understanding. So now, due to that censorship and propaganda and the unstable political environment, many words have lost meaning. Their true meaning, we don't know the true meaning of words. Word symbols have been misused. So now when he comes in, he says, most people will admit a whining woman can overstate a case. When people complain about the same thing over and over and over again or the same way, their cry and their plight is often ignored, and now it will not be understood. So now a droning background noise is ignored of some sort through the alliteration of the W sound there in whining woman. Now we understand there's ignorance that is happening. Talk to the paralyzing heat. This is a government who had laws that were very restrictive. They had harsh penalties for Black people if Black people broke those laws. So now when we're saying personification, paralyzing heat, we are talking about inquire how long the mercilessness will last. We must find out for how long will we be restricted. Let's pick out items from the rubbish heap, ask how the stench is like down there. We are talking of economic oppression here. People being forced to live in inhuman conditions. There seems to be no way of breaking out. And ask how the stench is down like there. The stench is the effects of the rotten system and the environment itself. Now, when we're coming in and we say, let's talk to the peach tree, repetition now is coming in, symbolizes the people that had to suffer the oppression that was imposed to them during the apartheid regime. They are now are supposed to find out how it feels to be in the ground, how it feels to be oppressed. They must be out. How does it feel to be oppressed, so that understanding can come into reality. Now, when we're coming in and we say, let's talk to the moon going down. When we say, let's talk to the moon going down, the moon sees things clearly in the half light. Cannot be, people cannot see things clearly. And as such, they cannot easily differentiate what is this one. But we should ask, we need to stop looking at things from a half angle. We need to have a full picture and a full understanding of what is really going on. So now what should we do? Come on. This is a call now. When he says, let's talk to the devil himself. The devil is the apartheid system and the apartheid government. It's about time. Action must happen now, must come. And now when we're coming in, talking versus actions now. Talk to those who can effect change. Stop talking around issues and amongst yourselves and gossiping. Confront them and start dialogues so that there can be a solution and a way forward, is what the poem calls for. Now, when we're coming into this poem, we are talking about an absurd tone, talking to the peach tree, cynical tone, despair, frustration, because they don't know what to do. But now the mood is very anxious because people are rotating around issues and not confronting them, and apprehensive because they don't know what is the way forward and how to fix things. But now he's very clear. Channels of communication must be opened, and that is the solution. All peaceful forms of communication must be exhausted. So now when we're coming into this poem, we are realizing that it is in reference to the atrocities that Black people face and the injustices. But the only difference is that Sepamla calls for a change in a different way, in a peaceful mode that is done through dialogue and conversation. Okay, that's the diction words, stench, rubbish heap, and personifications, moon going down, people are losing hope and don't know what to do. Realities must be brought and addressed. And as such, that's the poem that we call Talk to the Peach Tree. Right, we go to poem number 6, which is Prayer to the Mass. Prayer to the Mass is by Leopold Sedar Senghor. Right, the title is a prayer. When we say it is a prayer, we are talking about the issue that it is an appeal to a higher power, ancestor, and as such, this is to our Africanism. The poem goes back to our Africanism and as such to our roots as the Black people, and I believe our ancestors are what are brought in this poem. The title implies a thank you to those wearing the mask. I believe the wearing of the mask is due to the issue of hiding real emotions, true intentions. And as such, the people are in pain. They are slaves. Black people have been made slaves. And I believe they were called the Negroes. And at the moment, now the issue is that they have to pretend as if everything is fine. And therefore, what do? They wear the pain, and then they now move on and pretend that they are happy. So that's what we are brought into this poem. Now, when we're coming into this poem as well, we are looking at the structure of the poem. It is a free verse poem, a full free verse poem, very long, but unfortunately do not focus on the length of the poems. Please focus only on the content of the poem and how it's divided. so that it can be able to guide you into understanding the poem. You know, when you look at the content of the length of the poem, you will end up developing an attitude and saying, this poem is too long. Please don't focus on the length, only focus on the division of the content, and that will be a way for you to grasp your content. Now, when we're coming into this poem, we are looking at uh, a respect for the ancestral spirits. And I believe praise of the ancestors is brought in, and that's what we're going to look at today. Now, when we say prayer to the mass, this is an address to the spirits done through the mass, and therefore that is how the poet is talking to the ancestors. Now, when we're saying, what is this one? The structure of the poem, it is a free verse poem. It is comprising of a single stanza, but it has a lot of line breaks and punctuation, which allows sections to now look a little bit distinct. It has long lines, but contrasted at the same time with short ones. Sometimes can be one word or two words. And therefore, that allows the pause and the reflection to happen while reading the poem. So now we are looking at it does not adhere to any rhyme scheme at all. So as such, we will categorize it under the free verse. Short sentences will emphasize the speaker's intention. We have rhetorical questions, which are answered by the speaker at the end of the poem. Personal pronoun you to engage the reader is they. The themes in the poem are honoring our ancestors, strengthens us, and the poem concludes with a renewed sense of vigor, signifying that honoring the past does help us in the present. We have a tone of pity, grief, praise, respect, reverence, oppression, hope, and suffering. All right. One of the things that we need to talk about the intention of the poem, it does create awareness of the effects of colonialism in Africa. It also explores, its intention is to explore the culture of West Africa. It does also build a sense of pride in one's African heritage and their identity. So one of the things that the prayer to the mass or the appeal to the ancestral spirit is doing is to help the oppressed Africans overcome the present state of subjugation and hopelessness that they feel. We definitely have what is called colonialism in this poem, and as such, which brought slavery and which brought lack of identity as well as lack of human reasoning as well. So now when we're coming in, the shape of the mass and the different colors of the mass have a symbolism. The different colors of mass represent different rituals, ceremonies, and gods. But the shape of the mass resembles the human characteristics without faith. So now when we're coming to prayer to the mass, we are talking about addressing the ancestors of the various races in the country. The spirits breathe through the mass, thus the mass gives them life. But we look at the awe and respect for the spirits, and thus he does not address them directly. Instead, he says he greets them in silence, indirectly. And as such, we are looking at the totems, aristocratic virtues, courage that are brought in, and I believe it's lion-headed ancestor, which is pride, strength, resilience. So those are the things that we are bringing in now. So when we're coming in to the poem, we are talking about the ancestors playing a big role in guiding the people and the desperation that he is calling out for help from the ancestors. So these are the things that we are talking about when it comes to this poem. Now let's go to the poem and see what we bring in. Right. He addresses the mass directly as he refers to the glorious past of Africa when countries were ruled with pride by Africans. But now he also goes to the process of invasion and colonization happening, which drastically changes their past. So now when we're coming in, the image of Africa being compared to a princess, that shows the nobility of traditional Africa. Her death or the death of Africa represents the decline of traditional African culture and the loss of political power by blacks to rule themselves. So now when coming into the poem, we are dealing with the issue of the change that came to Africa due to colonization, the impact of colonization, and therefore the consequences of them finding themselves in a desperate situation of calling out to the ancestors for guidance and inspiration. What is the need for guidance for and inspiration? It is to re-establish African culture. It is to re-establish proud traditions after a long period of colonization, and therefore bringing them back to their identity. So now they are calling out for rebirth, and they are calling to the mass to speed the process of rebirth. The umbilical cord connecting Africa to Europe is something that comes in. Optimism comes in the poem when he shows that Africa will have a different relationship after they are free. They'll absorb the powers of the natural spirit through the rhythm of the dance, music, and poetry, and they will become true Africans again. So when we are coming to this poem, that's why I'm saying content is very important. Don't focus on the length. Focus on the content. Focus on that. On this part of the poem, it deals with reference to the ancestors. This part of the poem deals with the dying of Africa and its roots. This part of the poem deals with the call for the ancestors to guide them. This is how you must guide yourself. You must guide yourself according to the content. And as such, if you guide yourself according to the content, it means that you will be able to understand the poem. Here you go. And as such, this is what we mean when we're talking about poem Prayer to the Mass. Invasion of European countries, Africa losing its nobility, dying, decline in traditional African culture, loss of political powers in the black person. The umbilical cord is something that calls out every time we do this poem. And I believe it's the issue of the there we go. I believe I saw it somewhere here as well. The poet prays to the magic spirits of the mass to help speed the rebirth, the umbilical cord connecting Africa to Europe. Reviving the ancestral spirits of the mass will help sever the ties of dependence, which can help Europe to a more life-affirming use of its material and scientific world, just as the brown yeast is necessary for making bread from white flour. Oh, this poem is touching on our humanity as Black people. So that's why it's very important that we understand what we lost as Africans and what we had to gain back from the colonization that happened. If we do that, I believe we'll be fine. And as such, that's what we must focus on. And one of the things that we should I must touch on is the issue of despotism, the effect of despotism. I believe when we're talking about despotism, we are talking about colonization connected to Europe and what we became. When we are talking about our connection to Europe, one of the things that we call about is the absolute power and the cruelty that came with absolute power and the oppressiveness that came with despotism. So that's what we focus on here. Cottonettes and coffee men, oily men. I believe we are touching on the issue of that they were given titles due to their professions. They were working in the cotton fields and in the oil factories, and as such, that's what they came to be known. Exploitation of Africa for its raw materials, source of cheap labor, and just for economic profit. This is what a Black human being was reduced to. So, but now the poem ends on a very optimistic note. Africa will have a different future. So, as such, we will rise again and find our identity again. And as such, it means that we will regain our powers and strength. That is our poem. When we are talking about prayer to the mass, let's go to poem number 7, This Winter Coming. Symbolic poem as well, which must be understood in isolation of just winter. So let's go to a current press. It is a South African context. And if it's a South African context, it is based on the apartheid times. And as such, we cannot deny that one. All right. The structure of the poem is what starts off there. So we're going to go to it. It says lack of punctuation, capital letters, and break from the conventions of writing poetry is a characteristic of protest poetry. The poet addresses the issues of social, economic, and political effects of the system of apartheid through the use of imagery of nature. I believe when we're talking about the structure of the poem, it is a protest poem. And as such, when it is a protest poem, it was based on the state of political uncertainty that was going to arise. And therefore, now it was categorized under as a nature poem because of the winter part. It is a free verse poem, but it is written in a stream of consciousness writing, and because it is based on the way the speaker is thinking. So the way the speaker is thinking is how it is written. And as such, there is no rhyme scheme. We have different lengths in the stanzas. All 5 stanzas have different lengths. There is enjambment throughout the poem. And as such, we are calling it a free verse poem. Right. This is during the state of emergency. And as such, this was the state of emergency that was imposed by the political leaders on a nationwide state of emergency to stop the 10th anniversary celebrations or commemorations of the Soweto uprisings of 1976. So the poem happened in 1986, 10 years later, when the Black people wanted to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Soweto uprisings. But unfortunately, the apartheid system denied them the right to commemorate, and therefore they declared a state of emergency. Now, what happens is that people were arrested and detained without any charge. What did this create? This created widespread violence in the country, leading to many Black people going to exile. There were daily protests, leading to many lives being lost. Any kind of force was used by the police so that they could arrest the protesters. But now when we're coming in, we are talking about the defiance that is dominating the poem, because the Black people refused to back down. They refused to back down and said they will fight, and therefore they will anticipate the violence and the harsh conditions that were going to come following their denial of stepping down from the commemorations. Winter is usually associated with death. Usually, it is associated with death. And now when we're saying this winter coming, we are saying due to the impending state of emergency and the restrictions it will bring, the poet sees it as a time of hardships and of death. People will die. That's what he declares. We are going to die because we are declaring that whatever is coming due to us retaliating and not stepping down from commemorating means that we must prepare. So now when we're coming in, hard times are just beginning. No one will escape the hardships. So when we say the winter rain is heavy, walking in the thick rain, this creates a foreboding and gloomy mood when we open, because now we realize that it will bring danger. And as such, if it's a thick rain, which means it is going to be violent, and you cannot see what's ahead of you. We have only just entered. When it says we have only just entered, it has just begun. So the hard times are only beginning. But the rhetorical question, who is not frightened, now highlights the fact that these are frightening times. And therefore, it's a call that everyone must be frightened. So now when we're coming into this poem, we are talking about the issue of the weather creates a gloomy mood. Times will be challenging. Everyone must be fearful. Everyone must expect the difficult times. So if they are going to expect the difficult times, they must prepare themselves. Now when we come in, we are saying we now get a shift in content in the stanzas that happen. The sea is sullen, churning and broken waves around the rocks. That stanza, it now focuses on the natural environment. So now when it focuses on the natural environment, it focuses on the sea, the destructiveness of the sea, the waves, the sand is sinking away, stability is eroded, which means we are now entering chaos, turmoil. Nature itself is in turmoil. Rough and stormy seas, which are bringing uncertainty. The waves, the seas are not safe. The land is also not safe to stand as it is unstable. And I believe we have a metaphor there which says, under the sky, this shroud is falling. The clouds are likened to a shroud used for covering dead bodies. This is now a reference to a sense of impending doom, impending danger that will come, that will bring lots of deaths. So now when we're coming in, there's a repetition of the rhetorical question again, who is not frightened? This is an emphasis again on the fear that all South Africans must feel. Now, when we go to the next stanza, there is a shift in content again, because now we are going to a content that is now shifting to the urban and focusing on the people there. And it's clearly the women and the children. And now when we come to the women and the children, the focus is in every part of the city, said women climbing buses, and the women return with slow steps to the children. Now when we're coming in, the women return home exhausted from working in the houses of the white person. The children are alone, and as such, they are in every doorway crying. Poverty, hunger are all the issues that we're bringing in now into this stanza. So now when we're coming in and talking about social context of the living conditions and of the workers, domestic workers are what the females wear. Inequality and segregation of areas, they are going into the locations coming from the beautiful high places where the white people stay and where they work for them. So now this is now showing us unhappiness and gloom that is created there. There is tolling like a black bell. That's a metaphor. Sounds of the storm are likened to a bell ringing for the dead. They work for a pittance while is neglecting their own homes and families to clean Madam's house. So there are so many that they overwhelmed. And as such, the women are moving to and fro, and they work like a sea, moving with their tides, and their mood is matching the weather. Now, when we're coming in, their tide of sadness will drown the world. Who is not frightened? If it's going to drown the world, it means that their sadness will overwhelm everyone. But now we have a shift in content again, because now we are shifting the content to focus, which is focus on the men in the next stanza. They are described as dehumanized, in despair. There is a death of feelings. Men have no feelings. They're emotionally dead. They cannot feel anything. They are zombie-like. And I believe we have a double metaphor there, where they are compared to stumps of trees and also compared to tombstones. So now when we're coming in, we realize the conditions that men have been brought to. Men are the leaders and the providers of the families, but they are standing in corners of the streets trying to find employment and work, but to no avail. Now we realize men have been reduced to nothing in society. And now when we're coming in, they are having nothing to focus on. They have nothing to bring back to their homes. And now we realize what the social division has brought in society. The last stanza focuses on the children now. It focuses on the children. We are given that children are not afraid of the storm. They run into the storm. When they are running into the storm, we are now given their fragility and their thin state of physical state due to hunger, malnourishment, poverty. But now the children are the ones that are carrying the key to the future, because they start a fire, which means they're the ones that start the revolution and the resistance to the apartheid system. The children will sacrifice their lives in fighting for their future against apartheid. So as such, they are compared to winds of change. They are the catalyst to changes in society. They will end the winter, meaning they will rise up and fight. So seeing that the children are the future and will fight for freedom, the poem ends differently now. It says, is there a need to be afraid? So now when we come to the poem, we are given that children, despite being fragile and vulnerable, are not scared of confronting the oppression. They are going to defeat the apartheid regime, which has dominated them and has brought them suffering for so many centuries. So now when we're coming to this winter coming, we are understanding that this is a reflection on the social, political, and economic oppression. This poem reveals the hardships faced by the people during the state of emergency. So now when we're coming into this poem, we are brought into a tone of somberness. We are brought into a tone of solemnity. There is an anxious mood, a frightened mood, a restless mood in the poem. So now when we're coming in, we must understand that it is not about winter, but it is on a deeper level about the apartheid regime that in the state of emergency that arose in 1986. So now when we're saying winter, what does winter symbolize? Winter symbolizes the hardships and the harsh political atmosphere of 1986, the political unrest which saw many people lose their lives and suffered. So now when we are coming to the significance of who is not afraid, we must talk about the issue that it calls the reader's attention to the causes of the fear that have been raised in the poem. This is the poem Winter Coming. Let's go to our next poem. Our next poem is Solitude. Right. This poem has a strict structure. It's 3 stanzas consisting of 8 lines each. And when we're coming into, it has the same rhyming pattern. First 2 stanzas focus on attitude, behavior, and actions. The last stanza focuses on the end of one's life and suggests a particular approach to deal with this inevitability. Right. When coming to this poem, one of the things we are going to touch on is the issue of the title Solitude. The title means to be in isolation, which means being alone. So now when we're talking about being alone, we are talking about human experiences. So the title means a sense of loneliness. So it's a relationship between an individual and the outside world. And now when we come in, if you laugh, sing, and rejoice, the world will be drawn to you. People will be drawn to you. But if you weep, sigh, fast, or grieve, the world will abandon you. So now when we're coming to this, we have a tension and a pull between positive and negative attitude. People react differently to positivity and negativity. This is, I believe, what we call a poem that deals with a juxtaposition of the negative and the positive. Images, opposite images are what are in the juxtaposing, my apologies. Happiness versus crying. Singing versus sighing. Rejoicing versus grieving. Celebration versus mourning. Happiness versus sadness. So that's what we are drawn to when we say there is juxtaposing in this poem that we are facing. When it comes to this poem, I believe we have a lot of Thundereduc. The world in this poem does not mean physically or geographically, but it means all the people. One of the things that the poem deals with is people shy away from negativity. The world is not a happy place. It has to borrow its happiness from somewhere. So now when we're coming in, we realize that the world is a lonely place. And therefore, it means human beings must also experience the truth that they will be lonely and isolated. Universal human condition is that a person is alone in their tough times. But if one is happy and they've everything that has to do with laughter, the world will laugh with them. Happiness within oneself creates happiness in others. That's what he means. And now what he says is that sadness that is displayed through weeping and singing, that is the hills will answer. Sighing, it is lost in the air. We are saying when you are spreading your happiness, there will be a response. But if you are shouting your pain, there will be no response in the world. And I believe the other things that we are talking about is that people want to be with you in good times, but they do not want to be around you in bad times. Lots of friends are around during the good times, but you are deserted when you are alone. I believe we are also having no one is around during the sad, trying negative times, but alone you must drink life's gall, he said. And I believe that's a metaphor. So now when we're talking about many people come where there is food provided, feast and your halls are crowded, fast and the world goes by. There is nothing provided. No one is bothered when you are fasting and alone. Alienation, you are excluded. A banquet is given, there's an image. There is food provided. Succeed and give, and it helps you live. When you are successful and share the fruits of success, it gives a purpose to life. But no man can help you die. Death is a solitary experience. No one can help you. Failure is associated with death. So as a result, pain is compared to an arrow nail, which implies a corridor that people must move through alone as it is small and restrictive. The irony is that we are all alone in our suffering and grief, but on a very complex level, there is commonality in a sense that every person has to endure this, so we are united on that common ground. So, as such, this is the poem that we call Solitude. And I believe if you remember that it is a contradiction of emotions and experiences, juxtaposing of negative and positive, I believe it will become easier to handle. When we are coming to this poem, I believe when we're talking of tone, it does have a cynical tone, a satirical tone, and a sarcastic tone. And I believe we have a very reflective and melancholic mood. And I believe one of the intentions of the poem is to accept the positive and negative elements of human experiences. So, as such, let's go to our next poem. The morning sun is shining, olive shrine. Now, we are now in our Western poems and such. Let's get a move on. The morning sun is shining is a 16-line poem, and it's made up of 4 clear parts. And I believe she has separated the content according to the parts. That's what we must remember. And as such, if we hold it that way, as I said, it's easier to hold the poem by their parts, and therefore it becomes easier to handle. Now, when we're coming to morning sun is shining, one of the things that we are going to talk about is the issue of celebration when it comes to nature, the beauty of nature, though it will have a different connection to the personal experience itself. Right. One of the things that we are going to talk about is it is based on a tragic incident that happened in her life coming to Olive Schreiner. She lost a daughter who lived only for a few hours, 16 hours, I believe, as a result of what was called court death. So now what happens is that she now bases the poem based on a tragic event of her loss. But now she's going to use nature, the beauty of nature, to show that losing a person means that there is now a void, and therefore what will be the reason to appreciate nature when you have no one to appreciate it with? Despair, loneliness is what is dominating this poem, and I believe it is based on a personal experience itself. I believe when we're talking about this poem, we do call it a romantic poem, as it is based on the contrasting of the permanence of and the beauty of nature itself. Now, when we come to morning sun is shining, we are going to talk about the setting. The setting is in the early morning, awakening of the world, as we call it. The first 12 lines of the poem are very joyous, cheerful, peaceful, reverent towards nature. But the last 4 lines of the poem, there is a change and a shift because it changes to a sorrowful one as the speaker expresses a sense of loss. In a hand I never touch and a face I never see. So when we're talking about the lines 1 to 12, celebratory mood, admiration of the bustling beauty of nature in the morning is what we're talking about. And now when we go to line 13 to 16, it changes to somber now. Expresses the loss associated with human experiences. The last 4 lines are now filled with despair, negativity, sadness, and hopelessness. Now, when we're coming into this poem, colors are brought in. The green willow tree. That color being repeated symbolizes the vibrancy of that color. And I believe we're talking about life, growth, beauty of nature, and intensity of the color. But now it's freshness, health, and all those things. But now when we are coming to the golden sunbeam, it can be now a reference to riches and wealth and beauty, abundance. I believe I'll call it abundance. Now we have fountain bubbling merrily. I believe we are going to be given the issue of happiness that is brought in there. I believe this is a poem that calls on the senses, a sense of sight, sense of hearing, sense of touch, and sight. So now when we're coming in and we're talking about joyfulness, fountain, mood of happiness, very cheerful, there is an idyllic beauty that is given to nature. Spring is a beautiful time naturally, and I believe there's onomatopoeia in bubbling, giving it a happy sound. Spontaneous expression of emotions, beauty of surroundings is what we are brought in. So now when we're coming to this poem, we are given in lines 1 to, as we said, lines 1 to 12. Earth is beautiful and wearing beautiful clothes. Every part of the world is covered by beauty, and therefore that brings the happiness and the joy. But now when we're coming to lines 13 to 16, she does not have anyone to share the beauty with, and therefore that brings the sadness in her, hopelessness, the loss she has suffered. So what is the point of experiencing a beautiful natural morning if there is no one to share it with, is what she brings. So now when she comes in and brings the futility of the beauty of nature, it is permanent, but if there is no one to share it with, she does not see its purpose. So now when we're coming in, she is alone in lines 13 to 16 because she has no one to enjoy all this with. So what is the value of beauty when you are just by yourself? So that's the big question that she poses in this poem, which is the morning sun is shining. Okay, let's go to poem number 10. It is a beauticious evening, calm and free. Right, this is a Petrarch sonnet. 14 lines, octave, 8 lines, sestet, last 6 lines, which shows this the 2 different parts of the structure of a Petrarch or Italian sonnet. So we must know the structure of the poem. It's very important that we know the structure of the poem. Remember, when it comes to the structure of the poem, we align it to the content of the poem. That is the only way you can know the poem, because in a sonnet, it is aligned to the content. So now when we're coming to a beauticious evening, calm and free, one of the things we're going to talk about is the issue of it does have a fixed rhyme scheme because it is an Italian sonnet, and as such, switch in content will happen. Octave describes the peaceful atmosphere in the countryside, which is line 1 to 8, but the last 6 lines are now switching to the description of nature, to the speaker directly addressing the daughter in the sestet. So that's where we are switching to the sestet in the last 6 lines. Right. When we're coming to this poem, it is based on the speaker walking during a beautiful evening on the shore with a dear girl. I believe it is a sunset. That is his daughter, but he leaves something hanging because when he describes the beautiful evening, he starts off giving the adoration and reverence to nature, but now goes to the spiritual element when focusing on the child. So now childhood and faith are brought in, and spirituality are brought in the content, which is what we're going to focus on. We can realize it is a beauticious evening, he says, calm and free, peaceful, very quiet atmosphere. I believe one of the things what he talks about is it's a sacred time when nature is worshipped. And I believe that's a simile to a nun worshipping a god. And I believe he mentions the sun is broad, which is wide, far reaching. It's breathless with adoration, so beautiful, impossible to breathe, sinking down in its tranquility, peaceful and calm at the end of the day. The sun is setting, and therefore that's where the beauty is seen. The gentleness of heaven is on the sea. The sky seems to be joined to the sea. And I believe when we say joined to the sea, he now makes a connection when he says, the mighty being is awake and doth with his eternal motion make. And I believe we are now making a connection to the sea and God himself. And I believe we are seeing the image of God through the gentleness of the sea. Now when we're coming in and he talks about the crashing sounds of the waves, they sound like thunderclaps, but have no end as they are everlasting. But now when we come to these lines, line 1 to 8, we are looking at the breathtaking connection of God to the creation that he made, which is nature. And now when he comes in and says, dear, dear child, now when he says, dear, dear child, now the focus is the adoration on the daughter. And now that is the volta which shifts now. The poet is changing perspective, is changing content. Now focus is on the daughter that is walking with him at sunset. And now when he says the daughter might seem uninterested and show a lack of reverence for the beauty of God's creation as he is doing. But what happens is that she must know that just because she's not showing her feelings, the creator does not mean that she has lost her reverence to God. She is spiritually connected to God. Thy nature is not therefore less divine, he says. So as such, close to God she lies. Thou liest in Abraham's bosom. And I believe that's an allusion to the Bible anyway, and it is a metaphor in God's presence. She is lying closely in God's presence, and worshippers praying at a holy place, which is the temple's inner shrine. The inner shrine symbolizes purity and innocence. God being with thee, God is with you, he says. And when we, the adults, know it not, we are often aware of God's connection with his children as the adults. I call Abraham's bosom an allusion because it's a biblical term that refers to a place of comfort where the righteous dead await judgment day. So that's why we call it a biblical allusion. When we come to this poem, I believe when we're coming to the tones, very reverent to nature, respectful, affectionate to the daughter. It is a calm and serene mood, meditative as they're walking in the sunset next to the shore of the sea. Celebration of the beauty of the natural world is brought in here. And I believe also appreciation of the beauty of nature is also brought in this poem. All right, we go to poem number 11, Fernhill. A very long poem. Attitudes have been developed in this poem, but one of the things is that it is a symbolism poem, and I think you need to grasp it according to the content of the poem. It is divided into parts which will be easier to handle when dealing with the poem, to say this poem deals with this time, and therefore you hold it according to the content of the poem itself. Now, in coming to this poem, we are going to talk about Penhal. Starting with, let's start with the structure of the poem. The structure of the poem, it has 6 stanzas that are containing 9 lines each. And the poem is divided into 2 parts. Because the first 3 stanzas, this is what is very important. The first 3 stanzas are related to the poet's experience as a child. And the last 3 stanzas focus on the awakening in the child, which signifies the loss of innocence. Nostalgia dominates the poem. That's how you will internalize the structure of the poem and understand it. So as such, this is how you internalize the content itself. It is a celebration of childhood itself, happiness of childhood innocence, regret of childhood ending and adulthood starting, I believe. The tone is very reflective, nostalgic throughout the poem, transition from child to adult, as well as the interactions with time. It's a hymn of praise to youth and innocence, but the tone changes in the final stanza, melancholy at the lost and irretrievable days of childhood, which creates the nostalgic tone. So now when we are coming to this poem, we are going to talk about the power of time. We are going to talk about childhood joy and innocence. We are going to talk about the harmony and wonder of nature and the end of childhood innocence. So this is Fernhill. Now, when we're talking of Fernhill, I believe one of the things that we must mention is the issue that this is a typical day at his aunt's farm. It's in a farm scenario. And I believe when it starts on the poem, stanza 1 deals with the speaker merrily and happily reminiscing, spending time on Fernhill, which is the aunt's farm. So he's now giving the memories of the beauty of the outdoors in the aunt's farm. And as such, that is why we're saying reminiscing, spending time on Fernhill. But stanza 2, he now shifts and elaborates and focuses on his adventures. As a very green, I believe he called himself a green and carefree boy. His greenness, which is his innocence and his youth, was matching that of the landscape. So now when we're coming in, we are talking about the issue of him freely playing during his childhood. He is having in the country life, he felt everything around him was just as young, and including the sun under which he played freely and merrily, he says. And I believe he talks about he saw himself as a hero, whereby he was running around all over in the beauty and glory of this country childhood. In stanza 3, he shifts again. It's still in the childhood form, but now the shift is of a more detailed elaboration on the landscape. Getting caught up in the descriptions is what we face here, as he lists things after a magical things. And I believe he talks about the music, carried away into a dreamland, the magic that we're talking about, the owls whose call is heard in the night. He felt blessed, happy, and free. And awareness is created of the paradise, the innocent bliss, and the freedom. Now, when we're coming into stanza 4, he compares witnessing the coming of the day to Adam and Eve in Eden and God creating the universe. Now, when he says this, he is now talking about maturity. A waking child is symbolic of maturity to him. He wakes up, time has passed. What it's winter now. And therefore, winter is the symbolic end of his childhood and innocence. And that's why now he's now going on to creatures waking up to glorify nature. And now that's where he shows reverence to understanding the power of nature and the changes that it transforms to due to time. In stanza 5 and 6, we'll start with stanza 5. He felt honored. He felt like he was royalty. Animals were his friends and they loved him. And as such, he now recalls with a sense of regret and intense nostalgia when he was young. He was heedless as a child, and now the farm gave him all that he needed and made him feel complete. His wishes are to be fulfilled as quickly as the stakes of hay. And now he was too occupied to care that time was passing by, and he did not realize that his childhood paradise would one day end. He felt time is kind and loving, and he could hear its morning music and its singing. Children were still young and naive. They did not have any worry. They were in complete harmony with time. And now he proudly and happily reminisces on his adventures in Fenhill. So now he suggests he has moved from a state of perfect union to an awareness of reality. So now this is what we are bringing in. His carefree world has been left behind because he's now an adult. In stanza 6, this is where now he regrets, he laments his carelessness, and he mourns the loss of his childhood innocence. He is now in the present. He leaves behind the innocence of his past, and he emphasizes his complete freedom in his childhood. So now time is personified. He is aware of time. Time is guiding him and leading him until he loses the carefree attitude of being the child. So now when he comes in, the house is personified to reflect how the child felt about the house. It was lively, it was happy. And now the word new in that stanza brings the birth of the new world that he is in now. So now when he comes in, adulthood came too quickly for him. He laments the lost days of his youth. He accepts that once childhood is left behind, there is no going back unless the tool of creating it is used. Only then can an individual tap into the joy and freedom experienced in childhood, and even then, that joy is very brief. So there is a cry of regret and sorrow as he ends the poem, because time is no longer gentle to him. And it's leading him to now realizing the passage of time and the loss of the innocence, and now it only remains in his memories. So now maturity has come in, and he feels that time has betrayed him of his childhood and his youth. So now the only way he can focus on his childhood is to recapture the memories, but he cannot go back. So that is the poem that we are talking about. When we're talking about the tone in this poem, I believe we're going to talk about tones of joy and happiness. But now in the last stanza, he shifts from joy, the tone becomes of lamentation and regret. He creates a very nostalgic mood, as we said, and I believe longing for this childhood. And I believe the intentions of the poem are to reveal to us the joys of childhood and the confinements of adulthood itself. So now it's a long poem, but you must divide the content into stanzas so that you can internalize it and you'll be fine. Let's go to the last poem of the day, which is Shipwreck. Shipwreck by Emily Dickinson. This is a 4 stanza poem, and I believe it is of equal length. And there is a strict rhyme scheme. And one of the things we must focus on is that content is divided according to stanzas. Stanza 1 and 2 focus on the optimistic response to the news of the survival of 4 people in a shipwreck. Stanza 3 and 4 now focuses on the grieving and mourning the loss of the 40 innocent lives in the shipwreck. One of the things we should know is that the tone is divided according to the content. The mood is divided according to the content, and so are the themes. I believe in stanza 1, glee, the great storm is over. This is a response to a relief on the ending of the great storm, of the storm that brought destruction. So when we're coming into this poem, we are now given the issue of excitement and relief over the ending of the storm. Glee is capitalized. I believe that's a tone of rejoicing. Exclamation is to show the expression of the relief. So now there is a need for celebration. The celebration, you must be clear, it is of the ending of the storm. Now, when we come in, it says 4 have recovered the land, 4 have survived. But line 3 says 40 drowned. And now when we're coming in, we are saying euphemism is used there when we say gone down together. And now when we're coming in, swallowed into the depths of the sea, that's into the boiling sand. So the sand is churning violently in the raging sea. That increases the horror of the situation, and therefore it does bring in the intense grief. Stanza 2 comes and says, ring for scant salvation. That is the announcement in the town bell, ringing of the town bell to announce the survivors that are returning home. Exclamation is the gratitude that they feel for the few survivors, only 4 that came back. The ringing of the church bell is a signal of the funeral bell that will sound slow and stately for the whole town. Now we are talking about the senseless loss of lives. Devastation is painted there. Now when we come in, bony souls, they are given an identity and therefore they are personalized. They were members of the community. One was a bridegroom, which means he was newly married and therefore now leaving a grieving young widow behind. Now we are also having a mother, daughter, I believe when we, part of a community, neighbor, friend. That's what we are talking about. They were part of a community. And as such, what has happened? They were swept and tossed around mercilessly, helplessly fighting their fate upon the shores. It's a sorrowful and tragic loss of their lives. Stanza 3 shifts now to the remainder of the future generation, because now they are asking themselves how they will tell of the shipwreck to the children, who will ask what happened to the 40 that did not come back no more. So now the winter is personified as harsh and cold and cruel. So now the shock and tragedy weighs down heavily upon the children as well as the people who will have to retell the story. In stanza 4, the continuation is there will be a silence. There will be no explanation that can be given because it is too great a loss. The pace slows down. Deathly silence spreads as the tale of the shipwreck is told. The listeners process such grave loss and are also in shock. It's a depressing mood. It's a mournful mood. So now when we see the S of silence, which is capitalized, we realize the heightening of the sadness. The person relating and narrating the story shows a sense of sadness and pity and is overcome by grief, which can be seen in his eyes. But now no answers can be effectively given to the searching questions of the children. They too understand from the look they see because they will experience the pain and difficulty of the adults. So now the children must in a way come to terms with the tragic loss of the adults, which are the 40 people. Melancholy is created in that stanza, and as such, no words will suffice. Not even the old empty clashes can bring comfort and solace. And therefore, what do we mean? Hopelessness persists, and therefore tragedy has struck the community. So now when we're coming in, as I said, the tones, the mood differ according to the content. There is a joyful celebratory tone. You must be clear. Line 1 shows a joyful celebratory tone to the end of the storm. But somberness, sadness, melancholy dominates the whole poem. Sorrowful, depressing mood dominates the whole poem. Grief, mourning, death, loss dominates the whole poem, and therefore that's what you must be specific. Don't just say the tone is a joyful mood. There's only joyfulness in Glee. The great storm is over, and that 4 survivors have returned, and therefore that's where you must show the optimism that is there based on the poem. But now when it comes to the rest of the poem, 40 people drowned. They were members of the community. The story is painful to retell. There can be no answers given to the loss and what happened to them, and therefore that dominates the poem. So that's our poetry section that we must prepare for, and therefore it means that we have 12 poems to look for. We have 12 poems to internalize in preparation for the poetry section in the examination. This comes to the understanding that we do not choose which poems to know and internalize. We study all poems. This brings us to the end of our poetry session for today. A good day to you all.